haven't officially started yet.
There we go. I see the live button.
There we go. Now it's happening. So this is just, we have 2 minutes of pregame warm up before we begin. And if we did have Brent already, he could do some card tricks to warm up the audience, but we're not at that point here. This is great. We're everybody's lining up and coming online. This is terrific. Brandon started by having all kinds of technical difficulties, which means we're going to have a great conference. That's what that means.
I must be first in line for the cup of inconvenience because I'm the only candidate so far.
Yeah. Regarding the cup of inconvenience, Brandon, we don't have a cup big enough for everyone to drink out of this year because everyone is going to get the award, and we're going to have to dispense with the award and just grant it to everyone. It is the year of inconvenience. There's no question.
I like seeing everybody saying hello. If you're tuning in live here, make sure to go to the chat box either on YouTube or in the Zoom chat and say hello and tell us where you're watching from. I always love seeing that. All the different countries represented. I see people from Steubenville, Chicago, Chile, Tampa, Washington, all over the place. So it's good to be here with all of you.
This is great. Very exciting. Well, all right. It's 7 o'clock now. Usually, what we do at 7 o'clock, if it's a live conference, is we don't do anything. We just delay everything for another 15 minutes, and then I walk onto the stage, carrying all kinds of props. One of which is the cup of inconvenience, which, as we've already said, is not going to be awarded this year. It's too hard to drink out of a cup when you're wearing a mask. Am I right?
And as you said, there's no cup large enough for all the inconvenience we've suffered. It would need to be a goblet of cosmic proportions.
Oh, well, great. Well, welcome everyone. This is the 39th annual Chesterton Conference, a conference like no other. We've never had one quite like this. I hope that wherever you are watching from, maybe there's more than one of you in the room, that maybe you're gathering together with a group of people to join us. I hope so, but if not, we also hope that you can feel the camaraderie through the miracle of Zoom and YouTube as we gather together from all over the world. It's just great to see all these names popping up on the chat screen, seeing where you're all coming from. Hello and welcome. It's just a great thrill. I see that someone else has already bet that I'm not wearing pants. Well, it's one of those things where you're never going to find out if you won that bet or not. And so there is no drinking game. Just so you know. Great. For those of you who remember way back when our conferences were held in St. Paul, Minnesota at the University of St. Thomas, back when the conferences were free and the beer was free and the water cost $1 a bottle. This in a way harkens back to that. Everybody is drinking free beer tonight and everybody gets in free. It's a great opportunity. It's unlike conferences of recent years, totally unusual, but we absolutely miss being in the same room with you, but we're still going to have a great time together. I want to say just a couple of announcements before truly introducing the MC of the night, the man who is going to take us through the evening. There's obviously, he'll give you the details, but one of the big announcements is it's not too late for you to invite your friends to join the rest of the conference. If they become a member, they can sign up and they can get in on the talks tomorrow night, and they should, because we've got Tom Martin joining us, as well as well, me, but that's not the reason to join. So it's not too late to get in on the rest of the conference for new people. And secondly, we obviously have an unusual situation this year in that we've had people attending who've never been to a live conference and are able to be with us virtually, coming from many different states and many different countries. And it is a unique year altogether. And we hope to tap into that great worldwide energy, because right now there is truly a Chesterton movement worldwide. And now we really are feeling that we're all part of it together. So this is very exciting for me. And none of us would be here tonight without the great work of people behind the scenes. And I want to start by thanking Emily Durotstein, who is this great string puller, and she has worked so hard putting all this together, but she's leading a very able staff of Kendra Posh and Rose Gavaretsky and Sally Zwaber, and our new recently appointed director of evangelization, my son, Adrian Alquist, who only takes orders from Emily and never from me. So thank you, all of you, for all your great work behind the scenes. And hopefully they will be correcting all the technical glitches as they come up, because remember, we're all still eligible for that giant swig from the cup of inconvenience. But someone who tried very hard not to be with us tonight is our MC. He was having all kinds of technical problems just a couple of minutes ago, but I'm very pleased, through the grace of God, to welcome Brandon Vogt. Thank you, Brandon, for being with us.
Oh, it's my delight, Dale. Thanks for inviting me to be in the MC. I'm excited about this. And as you say, people who know me, I work at Word on Fire. My day is all tech, all day, all the time. I've got multiple monitors, cameras, lights, microphones. I've never had a problem with Zoom, webinar, Skype, except here for the Chesterton gathering. There's one other Chesterton board meeting that I had a problem. So I don't think it's a coincidence. Anytime you do something good in the kingdom of God, there's resistance. So I hope people can bear with us. I have a very tenuous setup here with an iPad perched on actually several Chesterton books underneath the iPad. It's very appropriate, but it's going to have to make do.
Oh, that's fantastic. Well, Brandon, as he's already introduced himself, works for the Word on Fire Ministries with Bishop Barron. More importantly than that, however, he's on our board of directors for the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, and he's been a speaker at our conference in the past with absolutely great response. He is one of the great enthusiastic Chestertonians on earth, and he's been so helpful to us. I'm so grateful for all that he's done for us. Well, Brandon, I am now going to turn it over to you, and I will not be live again till the very end of the evening, okay? It's all yours.
Thanks, Dale. And we'll keep the guessing going on whether Dale's wearing pants. I noticed that there were several comments. It seems like the consensus opinion is that Dale is in fact not wearing suit pants underneath the table, but maybe we'll find out by the end of the night whether that's true. Before I introduce tonight's speaker, I got a few housekeeping items to mention here. So first of all, the tech details. We're live streaming this through Zoom and on YouTube. There's lots of ways that the tech might be a little glitchy tonight, so please bear with us. If you are having any tech difficulties though, please send an email to this email address, live@chesterton.org, live@chesterton.org, because we have people standing right now manning that email address to check it and respond to tech issues. So if you're having problems connecting or audio, video, whatever the case, send an email to live@chesterton.org. We also have a phone number. So if your tech's not working and you want to talk to someone real quick on the phone, maybe get a few tips, here's the phone number. I'm going to read it out. 1-800-343-2425. Maybe someone can add that to the chat box. That would be helpful. 1-800-343-2425. So again, if you have any tech problems, those are your two options: live@chesterton.org email, or phone 1-800-343-2425. We've got a bunch of staff members standing by to help people. Also, this is super important. This is not meant to just be a set of talks that you passively listen to. We want to have a dialogue with you guys. And so throughout each of the talks tonight, please leave any questions that you have for the speakers in the chat box. And at the end of each of our 2 talks, we're going to have some time for Q&A. So load up your questions now, whether they have to do with Chesterton in general or the talks in particular, and we'll try to get to as many of those questions as we can. Also, this would not be a Chesterton conference if we didn't have afterglows. Afterglows are one of the foundational components of Chesterton gatherings. And essentially, after a long day of talks and conferences, everybody gets together, usually outside on the porch or the patio, and there's rollicking fun, there's drinks, there's food, there's pipes, there's singing. We won't be able to fully replicate that through Zoom, obviously, but we're going to do our best. So tonight, after the 2 talks, there will be some digital afterglows. We're going to have essentially 2 separate rooms, 2 separate afterglows that you can participate in. One of them will be led by our good friend Joe Grabowski, who's an expert on distributism. And I think that's kind of the theme of that afterglow. So if you want to talk about Chesterton, political theory, economics, distributism, if you want some good high-level philosophical discussion, that'll be the one you definitely want to go to. The other one is hosted by our friend Nancy Brown, who's spoken many times at the Chesterton conferences. Nancy's the author of the great book, The Woman Who Was Chesterton, which was the biography of Frances Chesterton, Gilbert's wife. So she's going to be hosting another afterglow as well. So you got 2 great choices. You might even be able to jump back and forth between the 2. I'll get more details on that before the night's over. But we're going to be sharing links to those videos, to those hangout areas in the chat box as the night goes on. So it's going to be a different Zoom discussion. You'll basically hop from this Zoom discussion to another one, depending on which of the 2 you want to go to. And then finally, a quick word about our great apostolate here. I think it was 2 years ago where we finally announced the major change in the name of the American Chesterton Society, as it was known for many years, has now become the Society of G.K. Chesterton, the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, more accurately. And this is now a big umbrella that encompasses a lot of amazing ministries and efforts. We're now a worldwide lay apostolate, which exists to introduce people to the writings of G.K. Chesterton, and especially to support the reform of Catholic education, evangelization, and the social teaching of the church. Your membership helps us out to do all these things. And by being a member, you're participating in all of these initiatives. And we're going to tell you throughout this conference about some of the amazing developments in each of those areas, especially the Chesterton Schools Network, which is taking off in extraordinary ways. I can't wait to share more about that with you guys. So thank you so much for being a member, not just for joining us, on this digital conference, but for being an annual member, for supporting the apostolate. It's completely funded through people like you. We couldn't do this great work without you. So thank you, thank you, thank you. All right, well, let's move into the first talk of the night. Today's speaker, the first speaker of this digital Chesterton conference, is a familiar face to anyone who's been to the last, 4, 5, 6 Chesterton conferences. Her name is Dr. Virginia de la Lastra, and she's from Chile. You'll recognize her by her vivacious spirit, her Chilean accent, her exuberance for Chesterton. She's just a delight. You'll fall in love with her after the first few minutes of listening to her talk, I'm sure. Let me give you a little background on Virginia. She's a medical doctor with a specialty in clinical microbiology. Okay, so she's super smart is what basically that means. Virginia works at the Teen STAR program. She teaches at Universidad de los Andes Medical School in Chile, and she's the head of the Healthcare Associated Infections Program at Hospital de Preca. I'm horrible at Spanish, so I'm sure I'm butchering all of that. But most importantly, for our purposes here, Virginia leads the Chilean Chesterton Society. That's right, there is a Chesterton Society in Chile. So this isn't just an American phenomenon, this is a worldwide movement. The title of Virginia's talk tonight is Paging Dr. Chesterton, Microscopic Adventures in Pursuit of the Obvious. And then here's a longer subtitle, From the Smallest Facts to the Highest Truths, Chesterton's Wisdom at Medical School. So it sounds very intriguing. Virginia is going to share how Chesterton's teachings in a medical school setting show that there is a whole truth of things that Chesterton touches upon, and how he helps us to see, think, and feel about all of these things. So please join me digitally from the safety of your own living room by giving a round of applause for Virginia.
Hi, everyone. Start my video. Hi, everyone. Hello from Chile. Thank you, Brandon. And hello from Winter. So I'm going to share my screen because I drew some slides. And the name of my talk is Paging Dr. Chesterton. So Chesterton says there are three kinds of people in this world. The first kind of people are the people. They are the largest and probably the most valuable class. We owe to this class the chairs we sit down on, the clothes we wear. The second class are the poets. They are often a nuisance to their families, but generally speaking, a blessing to mankind. The third class is that of the professors or intellectuals, and these are a blight and a desolation both to their families and also to mankind. When I read this, I said, uh-oh, what kind of people are we at medical school? And Chesterton continues. The poet differs from the mob by his sensibility. The professor differs from the mob by his insensibility. The part about the professors gave me shivers. I tried to find the answer through three questions. How do we see things, think about things, and feel things? On the first question, how do we see the things that are presented to us? It was clear it was mostly by quantity, size, color, and so on. Not very poetic. The second question, how do we think about things? Do we think? We memorize many things we do not even think about. But when we do think, we have a compartmentalized way of thinking. We were among the narrow thinkers, in which there was little or no interaction between different disciplines. Finally, about sensitivity. How do we feel about things? Behind all that serious thinking, bored. This is how I came to realize I was part of the desolation to mankind. What should I do? Emergency at medical school, paging Dr. Chesterton, come here, stat. And Dr. Chesterton came. So, doctor, what was the diagnosis? He said that the diagnosis was the thing from which we suffer just now more than any other evil is not the assertion of falsehoods, but the endless and irrepressible repetition of half-truths. The whole truth is generally the ally of virtue. A half-truth is always the ally of some vice. And the cure, I wanted the cure. He said, you have to know and teach that, quote, there is a whole truth of things, and that in knowing it and speaking it, we are happy. And there were not a lot of people happy at medical school. So that's how I realized that if we want to teach the truth to our students, we should use G.K. Chesterton's way of teaching, because he teaches to see things as they should be seen, think things as they should be thought, and feel things as they should be felt. But if we want to teach the truth, what is it and what it is not? Chesterton says that truth is a fact with a meaning, but with a well-discerned meaning. In order to discern the meaning of a fact, we need both imagination and reason. C.S. Lewis says that imagination is the organ of meaning and reason is the organ of truth. But imagination comes first. Since before something can be true or false, it has to mean something. And what is the half-truth? Well, last week, one of my nieces, who has just learned how to read Cinderella for the first time. Suddenly, she stated Cinderella was very mean. Why, we asked? Because it says here that her only friends were the animals of the house. Fact absence of human friends, meaning Cinderella was mean. The fact is absolutely right, but not the meaning. This is an example of a fragmented truth. Facts are not the same as truths. Some facts have meaning, other facts do not. And this is why Chesterton warns about the danger of statistics. We are filled with statistics at medical school. Statistics deals with facts, not with truths. Chesterton says that statistics are not merely untrue, they are also wicked. Most of the time, they get the fact wrong, but even when they are correct, they are entirely misleading. The thing they say may be possibly and really true, but even then, the thing they mean is false. Statistic will tell us that out of 500 Cinderellas, 100% did not have human friends. But we will hear mean neighbors, individualistic Cinderella, animal lover Cinderella, and so on. As Chesterton points out, the explanation is that it is impossible for the human intellect, which is divine, to hear a fact as a fact. Statistics never give the truth because they never give the reasons. And facts do not give the meaning nor the reasons. So taking all these factors into consideration, could we teach that there is a whole truth of things at medical school if my class was clinical microbiology? Here you have my bacteria. It deals mostly with facts and with very small facts. But Chesterton gave hope by saying that the study of the humblest fact will lead to the study of the highest truth. Furthermore, Chesterton states that everything which is true is connected. There is only one subject, he says. There must be a philosophical connection between any two things in the universe. If it is not so, we can only say that there is no universe and can be no philosophy. So there had to be a way to find the whole truth through the microscope. And this is how our microscopic adventures in pursuit of the obvious began. So how to teach the truth? At first I thought reason was the right way for this adventure, but Chesterton disagreed. Reason is always a kind of brute force. Those who appeal to the head rather than the heart, however pallid and polite, are necessarily made of violence. We speak of touching a man's heart, but we can do nothing to his head but hit it. So no hitting. And sometimes it's so delightful to hit heads. Chesterton and Father O'Connor, in whom Chesterton based his Father Brown stories, used to point out to each other the phenomenon that some people can make any truth look like the most damnable or odious falsehood. They knew that truth is but a nuisance without charity. Thus, it was highly improbable that the solution of teaching truth through logic with philosophical arguments could get massive interest from my students. Besides, giving only arguments raises barriers, since my students quite rightly become aware that somebody is trying to convince them, hit them on the head, or worse, brainwash them. Okay, so no brainwashing. I made sure they would know that this is not my intention. Here am I, washing brains, and they are very clean. They are hanging on there. And I'm singing, whistling while you work, la 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 la. Well, I call this illustration a very clean desolation to mankind. They are lucky that neatness is not one of my strengths. So, well, reason alone does not answer all the questions. The real trouble with this world, says Chesterton, is that it is nearly reasonable, but not quite. It is more likely that reason alone will drive us crazy. Okay, so back to how to teach it. Paradoxically, the adventure taught me that the best way to teach the whole truth is not to tell it. at least not right away. Truth is one of those secrets which are too good to be told. Chesterton says that truth is sacred, and if you tell the truth too often, nobody will believe it. The quest for truth must be an enjoyable adventure of discovery. According to him, the best way to tell it is as a surprise, like a detective story. Therefore, one has to be careful not to spoil the adventure. Chesterton warns that the man who tells the truth about a detective story is simply a wicked man, and he belongs in the lowest of the circles of hell. Okay, I thought. So, no hitting, no brainwashing, not telling it unless it is as a surprise. Chesterton teaches that in this microscopic quest for truth, the experience of truth is as important as words. The taste and see of the truth is as essential as reason, but tasting precedes it. Ultimately, truth cannot be reached only from the outside. Truth needs experiential knowledge, which comes from the inside. The experience of a truth can move people's hearts in a way that abstract arguments cannot. And the excitement and joy that a glimpse of a whole truth carries might leave my students wanting for more. Chesterton is the best teacher to reveal the truth through both experience and reason. And his first prescription is to see things as they should be seen. Before to start thinking about things, even microbiology things, we need to see them as they really are. Chesterton says that everything we see has a meaning, for it is impossible for anything to signify nothing. The right way to see the world is to see it as if it has just been created, as if we have seen it for the first time. To see things as new awakes wonder, which is the ground for common sense. Chesterton says, astonishment at the universe is not mysticism, but transcendental common sense. But common sense is hard because we have sinned and grown old. Most probably we are in Eden still. It is only our eyes that have changed. Our eyes grew old and cannot see things as they really are and wonder at them. The things we see every day are the things we never see at all, says Chesterton. Moreover, he points out to a paradox that the more a man looks at a thing, the less he sees it. And the more a man learns a thing, the less he knows it. Blindness comes with familiarity. A man can get used to terrible things. He can even grow accustomed to the sun, warns Chesterton. In consequence, we take our world for granted. As Chesterton says, so long as we regard a tree as an obvious thing, naturally unreasonable, created for a giraffe to eat, we cannot properly wonder at it. And this is why we need imagination. Imagination, the organ of meaning, can wake us up from our sleep. Chesterton says what is wanted is the truly godlike imagination, which makes all things new, because all things have been new. The function of imagination is not so much to make wonders facts, but to make facts wonders, he concludes. Through imagination, we can discover new meanings of things and taste transcendental truths. Chesterton is fantastic at finding new meanings in everything, including microbiology. For instance, he teaches that size does not exist in itself. Size is always relative to something else. In orthodoxy, he asks, why should one worry to call the universe large if there is nothing to compare it with? With this idea in mind, I looked again at my bacteria, leaving their size out. And I realized I was dealing with monstrous beings. It all depended from where one would look at them. Since then, I do not give lectures on microorganisms. I I teach monsters. Ultimately, bacteria are monsters, but because we do not see them, we do not realize it. And besides, it's way easier to remember monsters than bacteria. Since imagination conceives in the mind something which is not present, it needs definitions. Definitions are the basis of the thinking process. Since, as Chesterton says, you cannot think if there are no things to think about. Some people claim that definitions put a limit to ideas, but Chesterton clarifies that definitions are ideas. A snake's head and tail do not limit the snake, they make it. Thus, imagination is essential to good thinking. Imagination leads to wonder. Wonder leads to good definitions, and good definitions leads to good thinking, which is the next thing Chesterton teaches. Thinking things as they should be thought. Chesterton says that the aim of thinking is to find truth. He defines the act of thinking as the act of connecting things. Few things are more important than thinking, since bad thinking can be fatal. As Chesterton says, if you think wrong, you go wrong. And we were going wrong in the medical disciplines. By defining our terms in microbiology, we ran into several surprises. The first surprise was that we discovered that we could argue and not quarrel and discover things together. My students, even though my medical school is an Opus Dei medical school, my students are secular. We do not choose our student. The government chooses by tests. So this was very helpful in controversial subjects, such as STDs. Most of my students are fearful of this topic because they have had bad experiences discussing, quarreling about this area. But definitions fight fairly, and controversial disputes start to become clear. Honestly, it is delightful to see their eyes open by pointing out a few distinctions, such as orientation versus behavior, behavior versus actions, which has the connotation of the will. Only then, some errors, such as confusing behavior with orientation, behavior with virtue, we start having some common ground. Chesterton teaches us to always define our terms in everything, even microbiology, everything. Since, as Chesterton says, evil always takes advantage of ambiguity. After defining our terms, we can even start playing. I make up a game with selections from different scientific articles or statements called Find the Vague Term. And well, this is an example, and you will find several things wrong with this. But here it says, for example, this is a statement from a scientific society about the rise of HIV here in Chile. And when I translated it, but they said these things. We see that this increase, which has been occurring for the last 10 years, is due to multiple causes, but especially the lack of sexual education, ignorance about STDs, STD prevention methods, young people changes in their sexual behaviors, among others. And it was like, first it is due, no hypothesis. What do they mean by prevention methods? Changes, what changes? We don't know. And we start playing. And they continue. We insist it is essential to focus in the prevention of HIV infection by encouraging healthy sexuality education programs. What is that? I have no idea. And increasing and expanding information campaigns among teenagers and adults. So see the last sentence here, and we start finding philosophy. Look at this idea, increasing and expanding information campaigns. And here we have philosophy. The cause of evil is ignorance, and the solution, information campaigns. This solution is in the most literal sense Platonic. Plato thought that the cause of evil was ignorance, and that if people knew the good, they would do it. Some of my students will point out that Plato and the scientists are making a mistake by assuming that the elements of our soul, the rational, spirited, and the appetites are ordered. And this is how we then continue to Aristotle and the importance of the will. And all these in microbiology class. This is how philosophy becomes alive in all these scientific hypotheses, but the adventure continues. The next stop in our venture is theology. After discussing Plato and Aristotle, I asked my students what kind of information they would provide their patients so that they would avoid actions associated with infection risks. The answers are, I love them. I love their answers. You could be infected for the rest of your life, or you could infect others and you will have pain. Infertility, and my favorite, death. And this is when I congratulate them for their answers and I welcome them to hell. And here you have abandoned all hope, you who enter here. But if we're going to enter hell, we need a guide. So I asked Virgil to guide us. And here you have Virgil. And Virgil leads the way to a very special hell. Here you can see Dante's hell, the Naraka hell, the Niflheim, but we're going to the infectious hell. This hell is filled with pus waterfalls, bacteria, viruses, low CD4, pain, isolation, fear, and so on. At this point, we realize that scientifically we are doing the same that we accuse the ill-taught religion of doing, threatening people with hell. And both hells, Dante's hell and the infectious hell, bring feelings of fear and guilt. Some of my students will say, but this is real. And I say, well, some of us think both of these hells are real, but I think the threat with the infectious hell is worse. Let's compare them. And I love comparing hells. So let's start with Dante's hell. This hell is terrible, filled with all sorts of everlasting horrors. And the infectious hell, what happens with that, they ask me? Well, all sorts of infectious horrors, isolation, and pain. But many people who only believe in the infectious hell think they only exist while they are alive in this world. Thus, for them, it is also an everlasting hell. But there is a huge difference. As Chesterton points out, Dante describes three moral instruments: heaven, purgatory, and hell. The vision of perfection, the vision of improvement, and the vision of failure. On the contrary, this modern morality can only point with absolute convictions to the horrors that follow breaches of law. Its only certainty is a certainty of ill. It can only point to imperfection. It has no perfection to point to, he concludes. The infectious hell is more horrible because there is no infectious heaven, no ideal. Only staying alive is the ideal. And if they tell you, hey, I did this and I did not get infected, you can always answer, but maybe the next time you will. Health is too wide and vague to constitute an ideal, but an ideal is more sensible than hell. Chesterton says a young man may keep himself from vice by continually thinking of disease. He may keep himself from it also by continually thinking of the Virgin Mary. There may be a question about which method is the more reasonable, or even about which is the more efficient. But surely there can be no question about which is the more wholesome. This is how, through thinking, we start reaching a well-rounded truth. Suddenly, we realize that things which seemed disconnected, such as hell, philosophy, and the ideal, are part of a whole. Moreover, through teaching us how to think, Chesterton also teaches us how to feel the things we think about. So now we go, feeling the things as they should be felt. Chesterton uses the test of imagination to teach that things could have been different or not have been at all. It is through this test that Chesterton teaches the distinction between facts that are necessary, rational, and inevitable from the facts that have been associated by mere repetition. You cannot imagine 2 and 1 not making 3, but you can easily imagine trees growing golden candlesticks or tigers hanging on by the tail, he explains. By making this distinction, he smashes the idea of a predictable world, awaking wonder and surprise at the fact that things are as they are. There is no logical connection between flying and laying eggs. Chesterton points out that everything has been saved from a wreck. For the world and every man are a great might not have been. He rejoices in the being of things exactly for the reason of being as they are. By seeing all alternatives of how a thing could have been, he sees something very personal in the world. Therefore, I thought, microorganisms are also part of this great might not have been. And the test of the imagination can be applied to them as well. In order to do so, Chesterton and I came up with an activity in my microbiology class. It is called, here you have it, In Search of Your Inner Bacteria. The instructions are as follows. You can play as well if you want to. In this activity, you will have to imagine yourself as a bacterium that has not been discovered yet. You have to design the bacterium you want to become. Choose a shape, choose a structure, choose a site of infection, choose a way of life, and your pathogenic tools. Then you have to draw yourself as a bacterium. It's not art class, so I don't mind if they don't draw themselves perfectly well, or if they do it with the computer. And you have to give yourself a bacteria name. The whole point is that they have to create a bacterium that makes sense. The consistency between the bacterium structure and its possibility of causing infection is evaluated. Imagination cannot go against logic. Things themselves have limitations that are necessary, or else they could not be what they are. There is no such thing as a free thought without limits. For, as Chesterton says, the moment you step into the world of facts, you step into the world of limits. In the same way, one can imagine flying bacteria, aquatic bacteria, space bacteria, but we cannot imagine a bacterium being and not being a bacterium at the same time. As Chesterton says, we cannot free things from the laws of their own nature. Since if you free a camel from the burden of his hump, you may be freeing him from being a camel. This activity forces my students to see things from a whole new perspective, a bacterium perspective, and from a might have been bacterium. This helps to awake wonder in them. Immediately, they place themselves in their bacterium shoes, how they're going to get food, reach their target organ, avoid the immune system, and so on. They also start to make connections between different disciplines, such as history, geology, astronomy. They need critical thinking to create a sensical bacterium, and therefore, this is a novel way to learn how to think. This is a bacterium military strategy. They must think like a bacterium in order to become an effective one and achieve their objective. Some bacteria are supposed to be deadly. All my students want to be deadly bacteria, most of them, and terrible and cause meningitis, but they lack the tools to penetrate the barriers or to avoid the immune system. Others achieved their objective. Meet here Atlantida perniciosum, which killed the whole Atlantis population. It can persist in latent form as a spore. Recently, it was discovered by some scientists inside of an iceberg. And meet here, I cannot pronounce this name even in Spanish, so I won't try to say it in English, but it ends with lycanthropa. So it's a new bacterium that can cause the werewolf syndrome because it can cause hallucinations and hair growth through its toxins, which can cause different effects like mimicking some hormones. And meet here, Spectrus coniculus is a zoonosis which destroys the lungs. The designers made a model of their deadly bacterium. And here you have them smiling. We did an exposition of, a created bacterium some years ago. So Chesterton does not deny that the world is as it is, but he does not take for granted facts we have associated and called the laws of nature, only by repetition and not by logic. Through the test of imagination, the might have beens teach us to see what it is and to feel grateful for it. And this is how, through all this microscopic adventure, Chesterton helped us to reach a wholesome truth by teaching us to see, think, and feel all things, among which are bacteria, as a gift. And from here, we start to feel grateful. And as Chesterton says, gratitude is the highest form of thought. Our adventure still continues, and we don't know where we're going to get, but this is where we are now. So thank you to all of you. Thank you, Dale, for inviting me. Thanks, Brandon. And well, I owe my thanks to so many people here and so many friends that helped me with my accent and correcting me, and my sister who has been helping me with the talk now. Oh, let me stop sharing. There we go.
Well, that was just excellent, Virginia. I loved it. I'm thinking the whole time, what would Gilbert Keith Chesterton have thought to know that his philosophy was being used in a Chilean medical school setting, 100 years after he walked the earth? I don't even think he could fathom it. I remember, Virginia, last year at the Chesterton Conference, you were kind of teasing out some of these ideas with me, telling me that you had just decided to teach a lecture to all your medical students on Chesterton and STDs. And
I did that.
Yeah. And I thought, okay, that must have generated a lot of attention among your students. Like, first of all, that was such a provocative headline, but I imagined it was a lot of the similar themes here. Just great, Virginia. I also loved all the illustrations there. I think many viewers here will know that Virginia's artwork is featured very often in the Gilbert magazine. So if you're a member of the Society of Gilbert Keith Chesterton, you receive in the mail the great Gilbert magazine, which often includes some of Virginia's beautiful art. Listen, Virginia, I had a few questions for you, but given the time constraint, I'd rather just hop into some of the questions that people are asking in the chat box. And again, remember, we've got hundreds of people watching this. If you have questions at any point during the conference, whether about Chesterton in general, about Virginia's great talk, please leave them in the chat box. We don't want this just to be a one-way flow of information. We want to have a real dialogue and conversation with some of you guys. Let's see here. We've got some, here's a good comment. This one's from Naja. She said, I'm so glad to hear, Virginia, that you are doing this with medical students in Chile. Chile and many other Latin American countries are total battlegrounds with a lot of external pressure on hot topics. Is this an approach you are sharing, which I think is clear based on the presentation you gave, but more importantly, how do you see its effects? So how would your medical students who just heard some of the concepts that you just presented, how do they respond? Is it kind of over their head? Are they engaged? What's the general feedback?
Oh, thank you. Oh, that's a great question. Actually, when I did this, well, with the bacteria thing at first, when I did it, they thought it was like sort of, childish, but it was hard. And then they had a hard time. And when I I do these lectures on STDs and stuff. Well, last year, one of the students, they were almost in tears. It was so strange. And one of them came and he said, "Hey, doctor, when you said this distinction, it was like boom in my head." And it was great because you cannot put thoughts on people's head. So even though you want to, hit them on the head sometimes, but the thing is that you start teaching them how to think on their own, and then they have to see that it is joyful. You don't want to hit them, you don't want to hurt them. So it's been going, actually my students have been talking about that class more than any other, so they actually are talking around it.
Here's another question. This one comes from Ed Zukowski. He's wondering, Virginia, I'm curious, are many or few of the people in your discipline, and I'm thinking he probably means the medical students, are they religious or are they non-religious? What's kind of the religious makeup of the students that you're interacting with?
Well, I would say most of them are not religious, and they are enraged with religion here, at least lately.
Virginia, one thing that your talk called to mind for me, this is the case in America, I'm assuming it's the same in Chile, is how many disciplines in the world of science, math, and medicine are so ignorant of the disciplines of philosophy and religion. And it's not their fault. They just aren't required to take philosophy classes or critical reasoning classes. And so some of the Chestertonian principles you laying out are essentially like philosophy 101, definition of terms and forming rational chains of reason. But we're not getting that. I mean, are the medical students in Chile, what sort of, if any, philosophical training do they have before they even get to medical school?
To be honest, none. Actually, I went up to the States to study apologetics because I didn't know how to think, and Chesterton was teaching me. So I was the first one to learn. I'm still learning.
Well, I think you're well ahead of the curve based on the presentation. Here's one. This is from our good friend Kevin O'Brien. He says, Virginia, would you talk a little bit about your experiences with the COVID outbreak in Santiago?
Oh, really, Kevin? The thing is that I'm in charge of that at my hospital, and it's been like a little bit of a nightmare. But well, we're better now, and we have ventilators, and well, yeah, things are better. So I hope everyone.
Are you guys under this basically the same sorts of restrictions as us Americans?
We had been in lockdown for 3 months. So I could go to the hospital back and forward every day, but yeah. But I hate the virus, Kevin. So I cannot be up there because of that damn virus. So.
Got a couple more good ones here for you, Virginia. This one's from Peter. He wants to know, Virginia, did you develop your art through drawing microbes or microbes through learning art?
Oh, that's so weird. Actually, I discovered I was good at drawing at the 2015 Chesterton Conference by whining about the covers of the orthodoxy books. So it was Chesterton that actually brought me to discover that I was good at drawing. I ended up drawing microbes as well, but I love to draw.
You strike me as having a similar trajectory as Chesterton, as kind of, he starts off just by doodling on the backs of books on little pieces of paper, and then he realizes, I have a pretty good talent for this, and now he's drawing characters and illustrating books, and it seems like you've followed that same trajectory as well.
Yes, it has been pretty surprising because I discovered 4 years ago I was good at drawing while living in the US. But it was a surprise. I started drawing Chesterton first and the microbes later.
Okay, here's $1 million question from Leo Schwartz. He says, as a piggyback to Kevin's question about COVID and Santiago, how do you think Dr. Chesterton would respond to the current pandemic? What would he be writing about right now?
I think keeping your head on, because it is so easy to lose your head and your heart in this pandemic. And yeah, so basically we're losing our heads, and that's what he will be writing about, I think.
I think we got time here maybe for two more. Here's one from Tom Strephone. He says, are you formulating courses with Chesterton? I'm thinking he means like officially on the syllabus, Chesterton. And if so, is there any pushback from the school that you teach in? Do they kind of say, well, this guy's, a religious figure, no religion, so you can't teach Chesterton? Or are you kind of just smuggling him in there without really asking permission?
I smuggle him. I just smuggle. It's way fun. It's way more fun. And besides, they love him. It's just that they don't know. I plagiarize Chesterton. Everything wise that I say is Chesterton in the end. I tell them if they want to know Chesterton, just go back to the source.
Good. Well, how about this final one? This is a good concluding question. This one's from Lee Sundino. Virginia, what's your favorite work by Chesterton?
I think orthodoxy. And that's the one that actually changed my whole life. The ethics in Elfland is what most people would say, but it's what changed my life actually. And then
how so? Say more about that. How did it change your life?
I was in my last year at medical school, finishing it, and I had run out of books for a break when I was studying internal medicine. So I went to my grandparents' house, and there was Orthodoxy. Never read Chesterton. So I read it, and I remember I was studying renal failure, and suddenly these Orthodoxy books started taking over, and my exam was a day away, and I was reading, and I remember thinking, this is way more important. This is way more important. And then I summarized it and the chapter, and I sent it by email to all of my friends. I have really good friends because they did not kick me out, and they're still friends.
They didn't mark your email as spam and send it into the trash, right?
Yeah, no, they didn't. They're really good. And they said, thank you, Virginia. Thank you, Virginia. but actually, that book changed all the way I saw the world. And that chapter got me thinking for a whole 10 years. And I ended up in Houston studying apologetics. So yeah, it pretty much changed everything.
Well, again, Virginia, thanks so much for your great talk, paging Dr. Chesterton. I think maybe I'll confirm this later with the behind the scenes team, but I'm pretty sure we're recording all these talks and making them available to members of the society. So if you want to rewatch it, maybe share it with a friend or family member, we'll have it for you later. But Virginia, thanks again for logging in and joining us.
Thank you, Brandon. And thank you, everyone.
Good. Well, listen, let's transition now to the next part of this evening. We're going to have another great speaker here coming up, but I want to mention a few things before we get to him. First of all, did you know that the Society of G.K. Chesterton has a podcast? Podcasts are quickly becoming one of the most common ways people consume content. They're great because, you can listen to them in the car, while you're exercising, while you're doing housework, play it in the background. And the Society of G.K. Chesterton is right there. We've got a podcast called Uncommon Sense. Uncommon Sense. G.K. Chesterton is usually referred to as the apostle of common sense. And it's because his sense is so uncommon in an upside down world. So we take our name from that illusion, Uncommon Sense. The podcast is now hosted by Adrian Alquist, and it covers everything from theology to philosophy to culture to Chesterton's books, Chesterton's life. Julie, I'm going through the whole family here. Adrian recently interviewed me. We had a great conversation on the podcast about why Chesterton is relevant to millennials, so that's my generation, and then Generation Z, the people that are one generation younger than me. So if you have teenagers, young adults that are in their 20s and 30s, why should Chesterton matter to them, and how can we persuade them to pick up Chesterton? We recently had an interview discussion about that. He also has an interview with our upcoming speaker, who I'm going to introduce here in a moment, Brent Forrest. But you can find it all at chesterton.org/uncommon sense, all one word, uncommon sense. So chesterton.org/uncommon sense. Maybe we can get somebody to throw a link into the chat box. If you go to the homepage of the society, chesterton.org, you'll find a link right on the front page there. So it's easy to find. So check it out. If you have a phone, a smartphone, or any type of tablet device, you can go to a podcasting app. So the The default one on Apple devices is Apple Podcasts. If you have an Android device, it's Google Play, I think it is, something like that. But go into your podcast app and search Uncommon Sense and subscribe to it. It's free to subscribe, but the best part of subscribing is that all the episodes are automatically downloaded to your phone as they come out. So you don't have to keep checking and searching to see if there's new ones. Every time we add one, it'll add it right to your phone. So again, check it out. Podcast is called Uncommon Sense. Also, a new initiative we started is we've been praying the rosary each week, each Thursday, as part of the Francis Chesterton Rosary League. Francis Chesterton Rosary League. Francis is the wife of G.K. Chesterton and was a great advocate of the rosary. So you can join us each Thursday at 4 p.m. Central Time. So that's 5 p.m. Eastern Time. As each week, a member of our team leads us in the luminous mysteries of the rosary. Now, if you want to join us, you can find it on either Facebook or Instagram. So we're on all the platforms. You got podcasting, websites, social media of every sort. But join us on the rosary on Facebook or Instagram. We live stream video of us praying the rosary every Thursday at 4 p.m. Central, 5 p.m. Eastern Time. So check that out. And if you're not already following the Society of G.K. Chesterton on those platforms, do it. I think we just crossed 10,000 followers on Instagram, which is a major accomplishment. You'll find all sorts of cool stuff. We got Chesterton quotes and graphics and photos and links. So go on Instagram and search for us and follow us, and then Facebook as well. Okay, I think those are the intermediary announcements. So we're probably ready now to move into the next talk of this evening. Our second speaker is Brent Forrest, and Brent's a regular at all the Chesterton conferences. I'm sure you've seen him not just speak, but also perform. And I'll explain more about that in a moment. Brent is a member of the board of directors for the Society of G.K. Chesterton. He is a late in life Chestertonian convert. In fact, he was received into the church only 8 years ago in 2012. Brent is a retired registered investment advisor and he owned and managed Brent Forrest and Associates LLC in San Antonio, Texas for 30 years. He is originally from Fort Myers, Florida, and now he lives in Vero Beach. So he's a fellow Floridian. I'm right outside of Orlando. Brent earned a Bachelor of Science degree in journalism, but most intriguingly, he had an early career as a stage magician and a close-up magic artist. And that may be how you know Brent from the Chesterton conferences. He's often performing stage illusions and magic tricks. In fact, at age 17, Brent represented the United States at the World Congress of Magicians in Amsterdam. And for publicity, he once drove a car blindfolded. Okay, so if at the next Chesterton conference, Brent invites you to go on a ride with him, do not accept it because you don't know what sort of condition he's going to be driving in. Brent's story is included in the great book, My Name is Lazarus, which is a new book from the Society that features stories from over 33 converts to Catholicism whose path to Rome was shaped by G.K. Chesterton. I have a story in there, Brent does, 31 other people do. All of these stories display how G.K. Chesterton helped lead people to fall deeper in love with Christ and his church. So before I welcome Brent, his talk is titled, Getting Over Ain't It Awful? Confessions of an Armchair Know-It-All. Or here's the alternative title, How to Keep Up with the News Without Getting Down in the Mouth. So ladies and gentlemen, watching from home on Zoom and on YouTube, please join me in welcoming Brent Forrest.
Thank you, Brandon, and friends at home. I've got some wonderful friends watching from all over the country. You know, if you're new to the Chesterton Society, you've never been to one of the conferences, you can tell by Virginia's talk, the energy and the enthusiasm and the joy. We have a ball at those conferences. I was worried. I thought, gee, I hate having this put down on a little box called Zoom. But, you know, for every disadvantage, there are some great advantages. And at this conference this year, I think we have more people attending numerically than ever before. And that's pretty wonderful. My name is Brent Forrest. And as Brandon just said, I'm on the board of directors of the Chesterton Society. I do want to add that we recently started a chapter here in Vero Beach. Wonderful, wonderful people from the St. Helen parish here in Vero Beach, Florida. And I have to say hello to my friends. It's just been so delightful. If you get nothing else from my talk, I have two takeaways. And if you want to write these down, that'd be fine. In fact, you have to leave and do something else, mix a cocktail, go outside. I'll give you these two now. God always, while God always answers our prayers, he is not very good at taking instruction. Second point, no matter how bad things get in this world, they are never as bad as they are on television. It was an old US senator who he was asked, how do you feel about euthanasia? And he said, well, I've always held that young people are pretty much the same all over the world, whether it's youth in America or youth in Europe or youth in Asia. And let me go on record also as saying, I believe that young people are the hope of the future because that is where they're going to live. So rule number one would be, we can't communicate too well unless we can agree on our terms. And then this story, which I can't resist, because I used to go to these conferences where they had motivational speakers that would tell us about how to become successful having a positive mental attitude. As a businessman was told that the attitude is the single most important determinant in productivity. So the business owner went out to a job site to question his employees, and they were laying a very large foundation, a large building foundation. And he asked one of the men, he said, what is your attitude about your work? And the guy groaned and he said, I'm sweating in the hot sun to make $18 an hour. So the owner went across the way to a second worker and he said, how do you feel about this job? And the man said, well, I'm a skilled craftsman. I've done this all my life. I do honest work for a day's pay and it supports my family. A much better attitude. Then he approached the third man across the way and he said, tell me, how do you feel about what you're doing? And the man rose to his feet, paused, raised his hands, his eyes went to heaven, and he said, I'm building a glorious cathedral to the glory of God. And they fired that man right on the spot because they were building Walmart store. So rule number two, it is not enough to have a good attitude. You also have to know what you're doing. I chose this topic last year and I told Dale, I said, I have this terrible habit of ain't it awful? And I said, sometimes when we get together, like minds like at the Chesterton meetings, I'm one of the guys that said, did you see this? Have you heard that? This headline? And I used to collect this stuff. Years ago, when I was a little boy, we got the Reader's Digest. And I think they had a section called That's Outrageous. And it was unusual things that happened in politics and the news and culture. And you would go, gee, I can't believe that could happen. Some of them were just outrageous lawsuits that no one thought would happen. And so from that mindset, you have an organization that used to be called The Onion. I guess it is still called The Onion. And they would publish these phony headlines that were satirical. You'd read it and think it was real, but it was humor. And what has happened in recent years is that the events, I think you'd agree with me, that the reality of the headlines that we see and read and hear today, whether it's on the television or the newspaper, is so extreme and so far gone that no one should be even working at The Onion anymore. I would quit because I could never be as creative with satirical headlines as they do in reality. Anyway, I chose the topic, ain't it awful, because I had a bad habit of ain't it awful. And I thought, Dale, I think I can do a really good talk about this. Don't ever say you can do a good talk about something, because I got in over my head real fast. I was going to tell you how to handle the news, not get down in the mouth. And then this year occurred. Everything of this first half of the year occurred. And I was overwhelmed. And I started thinking, this is awful. And it's the thing I can't get past. So I was given an assignment to myself that I couldn't handle. And I asked Dale if I could get out of it. And he said, no, you're stuck. It's your job. You hang in with it. I generally always tell the truth. Everything I'm going to tell you tonight is my best effort to tell the truth. It is the facts that I sometimes get wrong. And Virginia's talk nailed that subject. This is what I wrote. The facts is something I get wrong. I heard myself in a couple of interviews recently, and listening to the playback, I caught myself on a few lies. I said, gee, that was not exactly the truth. And when I looked at it, the lies were really ways to kind of massage past something that required too much explanation. So they weren't the kind of lies that I would consider myself in big trouble for. But she commented in her talk, Virginia's wonderful. And she talked about how you give the facts and not produce the truth. And it's so very, very true. So there really is meaning in that. I'm going to tell you the truth, even if I get some of the facts wrong or don't know the details. Not only is truth stranger than fiction, it is more profound and artistic. Nobody writes better than God. Perfect example is the sinking of the Titanic in 1912. The sinking of the Titanic embodies greater tragedy, drama, irony, pathos, cowardice, heroism, subplots, symbolism, surprises, and unimaginable coincidences than the most gifted novelist could ever have composed. Some people have made a lifetime, as you know, study out of the Titanic. There's even Titanic literary societies and national convention. Not Tolstoy, nor Dostoevsky, nor Herman Melville, not anybody you can think of could have written such a story. Do you think? I repeat, no one writes better than God. And I believe he's writing all the time. I believe he's writing everywhere. And I believe he is writing a novel in your life tonight. And for a few moments, I'm a small part of it. Our world today, more than ever, is drowning in words. I mean, pardon the transition from the Titanic. Oh, by the way, someone told me not too long ago about the danger of putting off certain pleasures. Said surely there was some women that night in the lifeboat at the night of the Titanic saying, shh, and I turned down the dessert. Anyway, we're drowning in words. I have stacks of books at home, some of them excellent, many are classics that I have yet to get around to reading, or at least get around to finishing. And I suspect you do as well. Yet I daily gorge myself with words from the sloppiest places, especially the internet. Emerson said, he told young fellows, don't read any books that aren't at least 100 years old. The theory was that if a book was 100 years old, it probably was worthwhile, and that's why it lasted. And of course, if you really followed that rule, no one would have ever read Emerson's books. But in 1840, his good friend, Henry Thoreau, prophesied that one day man would be able to communicate with those on the other side of the globe in an instant, only to discover that they had nothing to say. And he was right on both counts. And now, having discovered that we have nothing to say, we keep on saying it anyway, and we're too busy clicking and texting to notice much of anything else. I suspect right now, more words are written on the internet in 1 second than any one of us could read in a lifetime. So what are we to make of this very cryptic passage? From King Solomon, I'm sure it was King Solomon who wrote the book of Ecclesiastes. There shouldn't be much doubt. Chapter 12, verse 12, right at the end of Ecclesiastes. This is the strangest verse in the Bible to me. Of the making of books, there is no end, and much study wearies the body. Now, this was written about 3,000 years ago. And that just stuns me, because seriously, can you explain that? I mean, Gutenberg didn't create a printing press, until around 1450. And if I'm not mistaken, everything back then would have been hand scribed and hand copied and so forth. How many books could there be? But sure enough, Solomon writes, of the making of books, there's no end, and too much study wearies the body. Now, can you imagine if Solomon could come here today? And I think it's a mystery. I don't understand I don't know what kind of books they had. But imagine him coming to see publishing today, or the internet, or even our 24-hour cable news. Now, this is something I read recently from a thinking intellectual, and I thought this person said it well. The coming peril is the intellectual, educational, psychological, and artistic overproduction, which equally with economic overproduction threatens the well-being of contemporary civilization. People are inundated, blinded, deafened, and mentally paralyzed by a flood of vulgar and tasteless externals, leaving them no time for leisure, thought, or creation from within themselves. He called it a coming peril. This was written 100 years ago by G.K. Chesterton. It's no longer a coming peril, it is the peril, an absolute overproduction of every consumable thing. And we finally reached a point where it is absolutely impossible to master the amount of information going around. So it gives us a new challenge. Now I want to talk about my grandmother from Fort Myers, Florida, because it ties beautifully with the theme. She was born in 1911. And she was raised in South Florida. I'm a fourth generation Floridian. Everybody down here is from up north. And yet my family, we're what they call Florida crackers. But she was born in 1911, and she lived through the Spanish flu of 1918. She saw the stock market crash of 29. She raised 4 sons without a father. She was at that time a single mother with 4 sons. And she sat by the radio as a 30-year-old mother when she listened to FDR on the radio tell the world that while we were in this deadlock of a war with Germany, that Japan had just dropped the bombed Pearl Harbor. So she had an unusual name. My grandmother's name was Morning Singletary, M-O-R-N-I-N-G, just like the sunrise in the morning. And a lot of women are named Aurora, the goddess of the dawn, and lots of people are named Dawn. But only my grandmother, it's the only person I've ever known who had the name Morning. She was a very interesting and very singular person. When people say things have never been as bad in our country as they are now, imagine being that mother sitting by the radio and hearing about the Japanese attack while we were at war with Germany. Grandmother said to us, and she had a lot of wisdom, and I'm going to share it with you. She said to us that nobody ever lives in the good old days because they only become the good old days when we live to see how things turned out. Her generation had fond memories of the 1940s later on, World War II, fond memories of music, patriotism, family life, romance, respect for religion. Great movies were made during that era, American Pride, American Unity. And folks actually had fond memories of the good old days during World War II. And it's really very simple. You can only enjoy it once the uncertainty and fear is taken away. You had to win that war before you could enjoy it. Morning Singletary had no education beyond the 5th grade. Her one-room schoolhouse is a protected historical site in Buckingham, Florida, on the edge of Fort Myers. She was an avid reader all her life, self-educated type. She always had her King James Bible near at hand on the table beside her. And later in life, when she got much older, we caught her reading, she got reading the National Enquirer. And we said, Grandma, that's tabloid stuff. That's junk journalism. And she said, no, they all are. It's just that the Enquirer is a little more honest about it. Many of her opinions to me and us at that time seemed ignorant and limited. But as the years gone by, so much has vindicated of her. She had a true and moral compass and an uncanny sense of proportion. And I think that's the important thing. The sense of proportion is the key to what we're going to talk about. Mr. Chesterton would have recognized and celebrated my grandmother for her unerring common sense. She'd say, have you noticed how it says in the Bible, and it came to pass? You see, it didn't come to stay. Sounds like her faith was very simple, was very solid. She believed that the God who delivered the Israelites from slavery in Egypt could and would deliver anyone who called upon him in earnest. My grandmother lived to a feisty 93 years of age with a clear mind, having consumed mountains of saturated fat and rivers of strong black coffee. She was skeptical of nutritional science and advice. She said, if you wait a while, it will change. I've lived to see that vindicated. For most of my young life, everyone knew that coffee, tea, chocolate, wine, these were bad things. You could enjoy them, but they were vices and they weren't healthy. And all of those have been redeemed. And yet who would have dreamed that the one health food that was always safe was the staff of life. And I heard a trainer the other day telling folks, if you want to be healthy, don't eat any wheat or cheese or milk, the staff of life. Grandmother ate eggs every morning, and eggs have suffered all manner of abuse, but she just ate them, enjoyed them. I'm holding out for a time that we find something beneficial about tobacco. It would be fascinating, for example, if researchers discovered that secondhand tobacco smoke kills the COVID virus. I think that would be difficult for some folks to handle. My grandmother understood the word modern, that it only means what is currently in fashion. Hence, the term modern science has no binding authority. If you doubt that, check out any book or magazine from the 1950s that showcase modern science, modern medicine, modern aviation, or any other modern thing. Yet people today use modern to weaponize their arguments and to shame others into silence. I was in the investment business for more than 30 years. I loved Virginia's comments about the abuse of statistics. Sometime along in the 80s, when I was full-time in that profession, we were exposed to a theory that a fellow got a Nobel Prize for a study called modern portfolio theory. And he had essentially come up with a mathematical explanation as to how to build portfolios that would weather the test of time. Modern portfolio theory. Well, in just a few years, even though he'd gotten this Nobel Prize, we started finding out that the thing wasn't working very well. And he had made assumptions about the math, and they were accurate and true. He had a sealed and perfect system. But he hadn't taken into account human nature. So looking back on that, we already have a modern portfolio theory. It's no longer modern, nor is it even true. G.K. Chesterton wrote that a sense of humor is the closest thing to the grace of God. And my grandmother found humor everywhere, even in the Bible, which is quite a trick. Mark's gospel describes this woman who had suffered much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all she had. She had suffered much at the hands of many physicians and had spent all she had. Grandmother says, well, there's nothing new in that. For anyone that had the belief that the Bible was word for word literally true, that it was fundamentally true exactly as written, she would always direct them to Ecclesiastes chapter 10, where you'll find the phrase, a feast is made for laughter and wine makes the heart merry, but money is the answer for everything. That's a bar bet, by the way. You can tell somebody, you know, the Bible teaches that money is the answer for everything. It's in there, and it says it pretty plainly. But it's the book of Job, where she found her best humor. And by the way, Chesterton wrote an incredible essay on the book of Job. Just, it's powerful. He loved the book of Job. And it has an underpinning to the book, The Man Who Was Thirsty. Now, you know, Job had everything was taken care of, away from it. He was wealthy, he had family, land, cattle, you name it. He had everything. It was all taken away. And then his health was taken away. And the man was at abject misery. His friends came to visit. in his misery, and they sat in silence with him for 7 days. Now, they get a lot of bad press. They call them Job's comforters. But if you think about it, I think they should get some credit. They showed up and they hung around and sat with him for 7 days. I think we could all use friends that would care that much. And better still, they had interesting names. Even Tolkien could not have come up with these names. Bildad the Shuhite, Eliphaz the Temanite, Zophar the Naamathite. And the only one missing is Engelbert the Humperdinck. Okay. By the way, Engelbert is still alive. He's still singing. He's 83 years old. I heard his voice the other day. The man is amazing, sings like an angel. Job's friends were preaching at him, and he'd heard it all before. He could have preached the sermon himself. And it was useless advice for a man at the extremities. He was dealing with something deep and dark and inexplicable. And then he drops this priceless line on his friends. He says, "Surely you are the people, and wisdom will die with you." My grandmother got a lot of mileage out of that line, and she applied it in lots of places, and especially to the anointed experts, particularly on television. One time she said of Bill Moyers, she said, "I've never seen a man so proud of his humility." Most people who work in media claim to be neither liberal nor conservative, but progressive, a word made dangerous by being a little too slippery. To favor progress sounds high-minded. Who could possibly be against that? But without defining the end toward which we're progressing, what is necessarily so good about it? Adolf Hitler might have said, "Last week we dropped 100 bombs on London. This week we shall drop 200 bombs. And next week we hope to drop 300 more." We're surely making progress in our efforts, but then we always have been progressive. The creation of news, both print and broadcast, has always been like a sausage factory. If you see how it is made backstage, you're less likely to consume very much of it. I have a degree in journalism and some background in broadcasting. I never worked for a newspaper, but I've been backstage in the media industry enough to see plenty about the sausage factory. The news industry always has been driven by its own needs, not the needs of its customers. We need information honestly delivered, but media needs a story and whatever will maximize the size of its audience. And that's gotten worse in recent years. The landmark film that is a treasure is the film Network, which was made in the 60s, which describes or pretends the changes in television that we're living today. Fake news is nothing new. It's been around for hundreds of years. News as propaganda is nothing new. But what is new is the incomprehensible volume and speed and the concentration of power of those who control it. Keeping up with the news today, as we did in the past, is no longer possible, nor is it desirable. Now, here's something I saw clipped in the paper the other day. We do not need a censorship of the press. We have a censorship of the press. It is not we who silence the press. It is the press who silences us. 100 years ago, G.K. Chesterton wrote that. In this country, we've long had what we call the silent majority. But I think now for the first time, we're seeing a thing we could call the silenced majority. Something like that has happened elsewhere many times. Germany in 1939, for sure. But it's new to our country, and it is very, very alarming. It's one of the things about which we're starting to say, ain't it really awful? Now, there have always been anarchists and radicals, crazies, violent protesters, zealots. In GK's day, they called them dynamiters. Lately, some of them are just being called peaceful protesters. But by the way, Guy Fawkes, he gets a pass because he had the romantic good taste to use gunpowder. 36 giant barrels of gunpowder under Parliament. And you know, it never went off. It would have devastated London. But I think that black powder is still the explosive of choice for people with dignity and class. Next to pipe tobacco and roasted coffee, there is no more invigorating fragrance than that of a freshly discharged flintlock pistol. Thank you for the digression. Have you noticed that for every statement of wisdom and good counsel, there's an equally true and contrary statement? I can't think of a bumper sticker of truth that doesn't admit of an equal opposition. How do we address the evils we see with Satan writing the script these days? Do we publicly engage the evil that's attacking our world? Or do we withdraw and enter into intense prayer in the closet? Daily, I read internet postings from thoughtful Christians. I go to a number of websites. They seem to contradict one another. It's a very difficult time. And every day I struggle with this. About the only thing we all seem to agree on these days is, ain't it awful? The critic says the Bible is full of contradictions. G.K. Chesterton would say, yes, it is. And the most outrageous contradiction in Scripture is our Lord and God hanging bloodied and dead on a cross. My Protestant friends ask why the Catholic Church insists on putting the horror of the crucifixion behind the altar, essentially front and center. Why not celebrate his resurrection, they say. Maybe you should show an empty tomb with the stone rolled away. We'll celebrate the resurrection. Why not? And I say, because the crucifixion is honesty in advertising. Feel-good Christianity works fine until it is no longer possible to feel good. And if we experience famine or persecution or genocide, worst of all, if we or a loved one sin in some heinous way that we find it unforgivable to us, the deep shame of a sin when we've committed it, that there's nothing but the Catholic Church can encompass that entire need in the human experience. God's demand for perfect righteousness and his ocean of grace meet at the cross. And that's the contradictions, the paradox. This is the key here. It's incomprehensible. You can't get the two things inside your mind. I know that I can't. They must meet inside ourselves. When God's grace appears, it's as though nothing changes, but the maddening contradiction turns into a beautiful paradox, and sometimes even a hilarious paradox. I think that's why Chesterton is known as the Prince of Paradox. And frankly, I think that's the secret, mystical secret inside his writing of The Man Who Was Thursday. Because Chesterton was always living in the good old days because he knew how the story ended. He already saw the victory, even within the darkness. I couldn't get over that a man could be as potent as he was in his convictions, clearly spoken, never give ground on his convictions or his morality, his sense of what is true, and yet do it so cheerfully, without rancor and without anger. I'm not good at that, and that I've struggled with a lot. But there's something behind him. He gives us this, and in the last word in orthodoxy is mirth. Tells us the gravest temptation to any of us as new Catholics, especially adult converts, is intellectual pride. And pride is a pretty grave thing. Our influence is limited, and a single vote with a binary choice can feel very unimportant. It's good to express our convictions, and it's good to vote. but it's not good to extend our anxiety beyond our circle of effectiveness. Some are called to the arena, others are called to the cloister. None of us is called to sit and fret. The most important part of life is lived at the lowest level. It is easy to talk of loving mankind. It takes work to love one's neighbor. In God's economy, things are upside down. The smallest things done with love have great and lasting power. Large things done with political pomp eventually fade to dust. Seen this way, our lives are large, powerful, and needed. We have a calling and a duty, and for most of us, it is very close at hand. Thank you.
Well, just excellent, Brent. I think so many people can resonate with the things that you've been decrying, that, you know, the whole news landscape's become so despairing. It doesn't traffic in truth, it traffics in what can get the most clicks and the most attention. I think Chesterton would be such a prophetic journalist at a time like this. I often wonder what sorts of articles would he write? What publications would he write for? When it comes to the internet, what would he, where would he be writing? Like, what websites would he be using? So lots of fascinating questions to explore. And as with Virginia, I have a ton of questions I'd love to ask you, but we've also got a bunch in the chat. So I'll start with those here, Brent. Here's the first one. They say, there's no name for this one, but the question is, I get very depressed trying to sift through the news just to find some scraps of truth. How do I find good news sources? What would you say to that?
What's a tough question. You really need to pull back. What used to be called legitimate mainstream sources, I don't believe are legitimate any longer. I think that's something you can say safely. And they're owned by large corporations, and they're driven for that. They're driven for the volume and driven for the money. I used to be a know-it-all, but I don't know it all anymore. And I don't know a great answer to that question. What I do know is that we need to connect more and more with one another, like-minded people, Christians. As Catholics, one thing I know about Catholics is they go to church, you go through the service, go through the mass, and then go home. And a lot of times without speaking to one another. That's got to stop now. This is a time when we need to draw closely together. The church is getting smaller, and our communication needs to be more and more with one another. I have completely avoided the answer to that question.
Good. Listen, we got a handful of more questions here, but I wanted to encourage everybody, if you have questions for Brent, be sure to leave them in the chat box. Looking at the numbers, Brent, we've got 650 people watching this talk live and participating in the chat. I'm thinking, man, that would make this, in the words of Dale Alquist, the best Chesterton conference ever. It was probably one of the highest attended conferences or talks that we've done. So I'm simply delighted that many people are tuning in, but I'd love to see many more people leaving comments and questions for Brent's talk. Here's another one for you, Brent. This one comes from Angela Halliday. She says, have you ever noticed that the National Enquirer and other such papers have largely disappeared, seemingly because their position in society is taken over by regular mainstream media coverage?
I think you're absolutely right about that. Journalism has always been sloppy. Any field you're in, if I was in the investment industry for years, whatever field that you're in, if something newsworthy happens in your line of work and you see it on the news that night or read about it in the paper the next morning, you go, well, gee, they got that twisted so wrong, you know? And a lot of times it's not malice on the part of the reporter. A lot of the times they're just ignorant. Some of the worst reporting about the Catholic Church is not because it's malicious, it's because the reporters don't understand how the Catholic Church works. But yeah, this whole business has really changed dramatically. And I think of the two cable news networks are the biggest ones. But what intrigues me, Used to be, you'd have a general agreement as to the field of fact, and then you'd have people who had different opinions and say, well, we have this problem here. I want to solve it this way. No, I want to solve it that way. What I find when I go, say, from Fox to CNN on the cable, is I get two entirely different realities. It's like we don't even agree on the facts anymore. And so, yeah, there's super agendas behind that. And I think a lot of mainstream news needs to be taken with a massive dose of salt, or maybe a dose of salts for that matter.
I've also been reminded here that if you're watching on YouTube and you want a link to send in questions, you can email them to live@chesterton.org. That's the email address you can send your question to, live@chesterton.org. Okay, how about this one? This one's from Alexander Weber. He asks, can you speak more to anxiety outside our sphere of influence?
Speak more to it. I speak to it all the time. That's my problem. That is the whole dilemma. That's really the heart of the dilemma. It's like in Germany when 85, 90% of the people in Germany are good, wholesome folks. They would have never done the horrors that were done in that country. Okay. And so the recriminations and the regrets go like this. Well, we stayed silent too long. I think it's Burke's line. It's all it takes for evil to win is for us to good people to keep their mouth shut. And I forget who the quote was, but who said, probably some good Lutheran soul said, when they came for the Jews and we didn't say anything, and then they came for the unions, and then they came for the communists and we didn't say anything, and they came for the Catholics and we didn't say anything. Finally, they came for us and there was nobody left to speak. And so that's one side of the dilemma. It's like, I need to fight this. I have an obligation to go out. What do I say? What do I do? How can I fight this? And then you get this complete opposing view that's perfectly legitimate and valid, which says, go into the prayer closet, pray the rosary, confine your time to the things in the inner world where you can work. I'm not answering that person's question. I'm not doing a good job at any answering of questions, but it is the core issue that bugs me. And I just read in the Magnificat about 2 days ago, the most beautiful piece by Cardinal Sarah that I've ever read. And anybody that's got the Magnificat, go back 2-3 days at most and read the piece about how to fight this war. Chesterton always did it with joy. He always did it with laughter. The ain't it awful guys like me often get angry. It's like, don't it make you mad? There is no winning with that attitude today. One more thing before we go there. The media promotes anger because it gives you viewership. They want passion. So even the websites, even some of the really good websites that may represent very good organizations, they put stuff on there. Go, can you believe this? Doesn't this just make you mad? They do it deliberately. And so the last thing we want to do, if we're going to fight this cultural fight, we cannot fight it with anger, and we cannot fight it with traditional argument. And I think Virginia nailed it earlier on. It's like, you show them the joy, show them something entirely different. And Chesterton fought that way, laughing all the way.
We got a question here from Victoria Kuiper. She asks, what role do you think satire has to play in the news cycle as opposed to straight facts? And I think the internet and social media has amplified the voice of satire. We've got online newspapers like The Onion. We've got memes all over social media. What role does satire play when news seems so weighty and despairing?
Well, what I think is that the satirists have been put out of business. If I read headlines and I'm thinking, who would have dreamed this? My father didn't die that long ago. I mean, if he saw some of the headlines about sexual issues, politics, of any number of issues, he would be going, that's not possible. Imagine telling your grandfather, guess what? In the year 2020, this is going to be an issue in the presidential election. He'd say, you're crazy. That would never happen in America. So the hard part about the satire for me is give it up. The comedians are already running mainstream news. We need to find other resources. Fortunately, no one controls the darned internet. So there is still some freedom there. I would hope that we don't get the censorship of the internet.
As we're saying that, this feed is going to be cut out by the censors, I'm sure of it. Listen, we got a couple of book-related questions here. One person wants to know, what's your favorite Chesterton book? And if it's Orthodoxy, which was Virginia's favorite book, what's your second favorite Chesterton book? But then a second person asked, what's your favorite book in general, good sir, is how they phrased it. So tell us about your favorite books.
Okay, when Virginia said it, it is. The book that changed my life is Orthodoxy. I love the book. It's a life-changing book. It's not that long, but it's loaded, it's packed full. And I say, and I'm going to answer all the questions here. That I say to people, if you have a little trouble with it, one, read it out loud and read it more than once. You got to go back anyway. But remember that he's not trying to make jokes. He's telling the truth, and it happens to come out funny. You can take him at face value. Orthodoxy is the book that absolutely changed my life. For fun, I love the Father Brown detective stories. I think they're a marvelous place to turn. I would suspect, it's one of it that really gets me. Oh, the St. Thomas Aquinas book, You know what the secret of epistemology, St. Thomas Aquinas, what is, and what isn't. End of discussion. Now, favorite book in all the world, my favorite boyhood book, I've got a copy, in fact, my iPad's sitting on it. I have a hardcover of Treasure Island, which is one of those beautifully written books in the history of the world. And it's a kid's book, a young person's book, a young girl, a young boy, but grown-ups can go back. And you read the first chapter, it's one of the most beautiful books that you can possibly imagine. I revisit that silly thing every now and then. There are many. I have lots of books that I love. Some of them I just kind of pet and rub them. This thing, I'm stacked everything on St. Augustine, and I've got Nostromo by Joseph Conrad. I guess I could just keep looking around and finding things. Books of the treasure. I'm sorry. The only thing in my house that I care about is the books, and I bought most of them at a used bookstore for $3 or $4, hardcover. So people can come and they'll take the TV and I don't care. Nobody will steal the books.
It's like, it reminds me of the old Erasmus quote. He said, if I have a little money, I buy books. And if I have any left over, I buy food and clothes. And I think that would probably describe you and me. I think I could be wrong here, but Dale Alquist maybe can correct us, but I'm pretty sure G.K. Chesterton was a fan of Treasure Island. I know he was a big Robert Louis Stevenson fan, wrote a great literary biography of Stevenson. So I think all those rivers kind of flowed together. Oh, there's Dale popping in.
Yes.
That was the emperor coming in to weigh in his final opinion.
Well, why don't I say good night to everybody so you guys can do a wrap on this? Is that a good idea, Dale?
Brent, I want to say before you say good night that you did a fantastic job, and I loved how you told the story of how you came to speak to our group by offering to give a talk on Ain't It Awful way before you knew anything about 2020. You'd offered to give this talk, getting past Ain't It Awful a year ago, and he goes, and then 2020 happened. Yeah, you are a perfect example of be careful what you agree to do when I ask you to do something. I hope people learned a valuable lesson tonight. You did a marvelous job, and yeah, you didn't answer anybody's questions, but that's okay. You're a magician. You still did the sleight of hand, and we felt like we saw the real thing. You're a great, Brent. God bless you. Thank you so much.
Thank you, and good night.
Good night.
Good night. Dale, I feel like with your prophetic powers, you need to solicit a talk for next year's conference titled Ain't It Great? And then maybe 2021 will shape up to be much better than this year.
Well, Brandon, it's funny because you're going to be giving that talk next week.
He who proposes it has to give
Yeah, That was a terrific idea. And yes, I totally agree. And I found just the guy to give it. And it's going to be Brandon Vogt. Yeah. You know, one of the things you said tonight, Brandon, looking at today's journaling and wondering how Chesterton would write for today. You know, my response to that, especially when people ask me, well, what would Chesterton say about something like this? We have his journalism, and we can read his journalism right now, and it is as up to date as it ever has been. He's more pertinent now than he was 100 years ago, and so I don't need to tell people what Chesterton would say. We just tell people what he did say, and that is not only good enough. That's more than we could ever have asked for. What a gift we have in his prophetic voice, huh?
Absolutely. Listen, I got a few housekeeping items here before we wrap up, Dale, and then I'll probably let you have the last word before we move into the next segment. But I mentioned at the outset that at a usual Chesterton conference, when we're all gathered together in person, one of the highlights are the afterglows. So at the end of every evening, we get together, usually outside on the patio, the porch, maybe around the pool area. And there's a lot of frivolity. There's food, there's drinks, there's pipes, there's cigars, there's singing, there's lots of fun. Obviously, we can't do it exactly like that through Zoom, but we're going to give it our best shot. We're going to have some digital afterglows right after this closing segment here. And there, you actually have two opportunities, two different afterglows to attend. One of them is going to be titled Let's Talk Distributism, and it's going to be hosted by our good friend Joe Grabowski, who's an expert not only in distributism, but in what all of the 20th century English Catholic proponents of it had to say. Chesterton, Hilaire Belloc, Father Vincent McNabb. He's a total gift and a fount of knowledge. So I encourage you to go hang out with Joe. If you want to talk economics, distributism, political theory, that's the afterglow that you want to attend. The second one is titled All Things Chesterton, and it is exactly what it sounds like. Anything that you want to discuss regarding Chesterton's books, his ideas, his person, his life, that's the afterglow you want to attend. It's hosted by Nancy Brown. Nancy's spoken several times at Chesterton conferences. She's the author of the book, The Woman Who Was Chesterton, which is the first biography of Chesterton's wife, Frances. And she's another font of knowledge and joy. So think about which of those two you want to go to. The way it's going to work is there's a separate Zoom link to each of those afterglows. You'll find it in the chat box. We're sharing the link there. So once we wrap up with this Zoom conversation, click that link to open up a new Zoom discussion, which will take you to the right afterglow room. And there you can hang out with hundreds of other people. If you're watching this on YouTube, what you want to do is send an email to live@chesterton.org. And we have staff members that are going to reply immediately to that email with the links to the two afterglow rooms. So send an email to live@chesterton.org and we'll reply with the links to the afterglow rooms. Now, they wanted me to mention this is important, that the afterglow links are not being recorded. And so when they told me that, I was trying to think, maybe that means some people can act as crazy as they want, knowing that it won't be recorded for posterity. But I think it also means that that discussion is going to be one time. You won't be able to go revisit it. So if you want to hang out and talk about distributism, you want to show up live. Don't think that you might be able to go back and watch it later. But the talks, the one from Virginia, the other one from Brent that you heard, we have recorded those, and those will be available for later viewing.
That's keeping our tradition going too, Brandon. We've always recorded the talks and we've never recorded the afterglows.
Yeah, for good reason.
Keep that going. I understand too, Brent, that Brandon, that the email is actually live@chesterton.org.
You can either email live or live, depending on your web browser and your language preferences, right? live@chesterton.org or live@chesterton.org. They've sent me a note here that you can find those links to the afterglow parties also on the web page for this Chesterton conference. So if you just go to chesterton.org, click on the live stream page for this conference that you're watching right now, we'll also have the links there. So a bunch of ways to get it, but the important thing is after we wrap up here, click one of those two links and join us for one of the two afterglows. Well, Dale, first night, day one in the books, I think I'll turn it over to you for some closing words here.
Brandon, thank you for a marvelous job of emceeing tonight. And I'm so grateful that we overcame the devil and got the devil out of your computer and that you were able to do it, because the backup plan for the backup MC would not have lived up to what you did. So thank you so much. A marvelous job
My
of taking
delight.
care of that duty. I also want to thank Virginia, of course, who just was a leadoff grand slam. Now there's a paradox. She was a leadoff grand slam.
There were runners still on base from the last game. that
From the
she brought.
runners from last year. And it was such a marvelous first talk tonight that really set the tone just right for the conference. We, of course, are suffering from having an abbreviated conference, just 2 nights on and 2 talks each night. But her talk was worth many talks. It was just so profound, so full, and with the great joy. And then she even brings her wonderful art into it. So we're very grateful to her as well. And I've already given my thanks to Brent. But I also want to thank everyone for tuning in and being part of the Chesterton Conference. The very first, as I said, 39th annual Chesterton Conference, the very first one was held in Wisconsin. 39 years ago. It was 10 people sitting around a table. Those people, only one of whom is still alive, never would have imagined that we would be doing something like this in this format, bringing people from all over the world together, having our kickoff speaker being a doctor from Chile. It's unimaginable, and yet it's the same great material, same inspiration, same drive that has united us. We've come a long ways. We still have a long ways to go, but these yearly conferences are truly a major shot in the arm for everyone. And we're all looking forward to it, even in this strange format this year. I've really been needing this myself, because it's been a tough go, as it has been for everyone. So we're off to a marvelous start, everyone. Thank you. We look forward to being with you again tomorrow night. Enjoy the afterglow, and we'll have more good stuff tomorrow night. God bless and good night.